Before start story, please tell me where and what time you are watching. The painting that eats people. Chapter 1. The auction. The air in the small, dimly lit auction house was thick with the scent of aged wood and musty fabric. Samantha Rivers adjusted her black gloves as she sat in the second row, eyes fixed on the large object covered in a velvet cloth on the stage. She had no interest in art, but her grandmother Eleanor had begged her to attend. Eleanor was too frail to come herself, but her passion for antiques and history was unmatched. Samantha, her dutiful granddaughter, had reluctantly agreed. Lot 47, announced the auctioneer, a thin man with graying hair and a sharp, nasally voice. A mysterious and unique painting believed to date back to the late 18th century, artist unknown. The velvet cloth was whisked away, revealing a massive oil painting. It depicted a dense, shadowy forest bathed in eerie twilight. In the center stood a clearing with a solitary figure, a man in ragged clothes, his face obscured by shadow. The trees seemed almost alive, their twisted branches reaching out like claws. A murmur spread through the room. Samantha felt a chill run down her spine as she stared at the painting. There was something off about it. The longer she looked, the more she felt as though the figure in the clearing was watching her, despite his face being hidden. Bidding starts at $500, the auctioneer said. Samantha had no intention of bidding, but as the price climbed higher and higher, she found herself captivated. She couldn't tear her gaze away from the painting. When the hammer fell at $10,000, the man who had won, a short, balding collector, looked almost euphoric. He rushed to sign the paperwork, and the painting was quickly removed from the stage. Strange, Samantha muttered to herself. She felt an unshakable sense of unease as she left the auction house that night, but she dismissed it as nothing more than her imagination. Chapter 2. The Collector's Fate. 2 days later, the news broke. The man who had purchased the painting was found dead in his home. The details were grim. The room where the painting had been hung was in disarray, with claw marks gouged into the walls and floor. His body was found sprawled on the floor, his face frozen in an expression of sheer terror. The painting was gone. Samantha read the article twice, her heart pounding. The story mentioned that the man had called a friend the night before, claiming he felt as though the figure in the painting was moving closer to the edge of the forest. Coincidence, she whispered, trying to convince herself. Yet deep down, she felt a cold dread settling in her chest. Chapter 3. A New Arrival. A week later, Samantha returned home from work to find her grandmother sitting in her living room. On the coffee table lay an object wrapped in brown paper. What is that? Samantha asked, dropping her bag onto the floor. A gift, Eleanor said, her voice tinged with excitement. For you. Samantha's stomach turned as she tore open the wrapping. Her breath caught in her throat. It was the painting. Where did you get this? She demanded, her voice rising. Eleanor's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. The collector's estate went up for sale. I thought you'd love it. Look at the detail. You know the man who owned this died, right? Samantha said, her voice trembling. Horribly. Hmm. Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. Superstition. You know I don't believe in that nonsense. Samantha wanted to protest, but the look of joy on her grandmother's face stopped her. She reluctantly agreed to keep the painting, at least for now. She hung it in her study, the only room in her apartment she rarely used. Chapter 4. The Moving Figure. That night, Samantha dreamt of the forest. She was standing in the clearing, the air heavy with silence. The man from the painting was there, but this time his face was visible. His hollow eyes stared at her, and his mouth moved as though he were speaking, but no sound came out. When she woke up, her sheets were damp with sweat. Over the next few days, she began to notice small changes in the painting. At first, they were subtle. The shadows seemed deeper, the trees more menacing. Then she saw it. The man in the clearing had moved. His body was slightly turned, as if he were looking toward the edge of the painting. She tried to dismiss it as her imagination, but the changes became impossible to ignore. By the end of the week, the man was no longer in the clearing. He was standing at the edge of the forest, one foot stepping into darkness beyond the frame. Chapter 5 Descent. Samantha's sleep grew restless. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in the forest. The man's voice grew louder, though she still couldn't understand his words. She began avoiding the study altogether, but the oppressive feeling of being watched followed her everywhere. She decided to move the painting to the basement. As she carried it down the stairs, the air seemed to grow colder. She propped it against the wall and covered it with an old sheet. That night, the dream stopped. Samantha finally slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. But when she woke up, she found muddy footprints leading from the basement to her bedroom. Chapter 6 The Truth. Terrified, Samantha called her grandmother. Eleanor listened patiently as Samantha recounted everything: the dreams, the changes in the painting, the footprints. You have to get rid of it, Samantha said, her voice shaking. Eleanor sighed. I'm sorry, dear. I didn't know it would cause this much trouble. There's a legend about that painting. It's said to be cursed. You're telling me this now? Samantha snapped. I thought it was just a story. Eleanor protested. They say the painting was created by a man who sold his soul to capture the essence of the forest spirit. It said the painting hungers for people it consumes them. Chapter 7 The Confrontation. Determined to destroy the painting, Samantha grabbed a knife and headed to the basement. She tore the sheet off the painting and froze. The man was gone. The forest was darker than ever, and in the distance she could see her own silhouette standing in the clearing. Before she could react, the painting began to move. The trees swayed and a shadow emerged from the darkness. It was the man. He stepped out of the painting and into the basement. Samantha screamed and swung the knife, but it passed through him as though he were made of smoke. His hollow eyes stared into hers and he whispered, "Join me." The room went black. Chapter 8 The Ending. When Samantha woke up, she was no longer in her basement. She was in the forest. The air was cold, the trees towering above her. She looked down and saw the knife in her hand, but it was useless. The man stood before her, smiling. "This is your home now," he said, his voice echoing through the trees. Back in her apartment, the painting hung on the wall of the study once more. The forest was still, the clearing empty. But if one looked closely, they might see a figure standing deep in the shadows, a woman with terrified eyes. The painting had eaten again.